The Vorthek fleet arrived in orbit around Earth like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. Their massive ships, jagged black monoliths bristling with weapons, cast eerie shadows over the planet below. For Commander Kelvol, this was just another conquest. He had led invasions on countless worlds, each more dangerous than the last. But Earth, it was supposed to be easy. Kale stood on the bridge of his flagship, the obsidian spear, gazing down at the blue and green orb through the viewport. His crimson eyes narrowed as he studied it. Primitive cities dotted the surface, their lights flickering faintly even from space. There were no orbital defenses, no signs of advanced technology. Just a fragile world teeming with life that barely understood what was coming for them. Pathetic, Kale muttered under his breath, his voice deep and guttural. Beside him, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Zern, tilted her head in agreement. Her elongated skull and glowing green veins made her look almost insect-like compared to Kale's hulking, armored form. "They haven't even tried to retaliate," Zern said, her tone dripping with contempt. "No resistance fleets, no energy shields. Are they really so naive?" Kale smirked, baring sharp teeth. "Naivete is irrelevant. What matters is dominance. We crush them quickly, take what resources we need, and move on." Earth wasn't special. Not to Kale, not to the Vorthek Empire. They had conquered planets with atmospheres too toxic for most species to breathe, oceans boiling with molten lava, and jungles filled with creatures that could tear a starship apart. This tiny rock floating in the void of space posed no real challenge, or so Kale believed. But there was something about Earth that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was the way its inhabitants clung to hope despite centuries of war, poverty, and chaos among themselves. Humans were resilient, yes, but resilience didn't equal strength. Still, Kale felt a strange itch at the back of his mind. A whisper of doubt he quickly silenced. "Prepare the landing forces," Kale ordered, turning away from the viewport. "Deploy the shock troopers first. Let them soften up the population before we begin resource extraction." Zern nodded and relayed the command. Within moments, smaller ships detached from the mothership, descending toward Earth like falling stars. Inside those vessels, rows of Vorthak soldiers sat silently, their metallic exoskeletons gleaming under dim red light. Each warrior carried weapons capable of leveling entire city blocks. To them, this mission was routine. Back on Earth, alarms blared across military bases as radar systems detected the incoming invaders. Governments scrambled to respond, but their efforts were disorganized and futile. Fighter jets took off into the sky, only to be vaporized by Vorthak lasers before they could get close. Panic spread like wildfire as people watched the alien ships descend on live broadcasts. In one underground bunker, Dr. Elena Reyes stared at a screen showing footage of the invasion. She clenched her fists tightly, her knuckles white. As a scientist, she had always hoped humanity would reach the stars peacefully. Instead, the stars had come to Earth, and they brought death with them. "We can't fight them directly," Elena whispered to herself. Her gaze shifted to a sealed container sitting on a nearby table. Inside it lay something ancient, something powerful, something Earth had kept hidden for millions of years. As the first Vorthak boots touched the ground, Commander Kale leaned back in his command chair, confident in his victory. Little did he know, Earth had secrets buried deeper than any battlefield. And sometimes, the smallest spark could ignite the fiercest fire. Deep beneath the ruins of what was once New York City, Dr. Elena Reyes worked tirelessly in a dimly lit underground lab. The air was thick with tension, the faint hum of generators barely masking the distant rumble of explosions above. Around her, a small team of survivors moved quickly, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. Some patched-up wounded rebels brought in from skirmishes. Others monitored shaky radio signals for any sign of coordination among scattered resistance groups. Belena's hands trembled as she adjusted the microscope before her. On the slide sat a sample of an organism so ancient that it predated humanity itself. Discovered during a failed mining expedition years ago, this microscopic entity, codenamed Erebos, had been locked away in a government facility until now. It was capable of adapting to almost anything. Extreme temperatures, radiation, even synthetic materials. But there was something else about Erebos that intrigued and terrified Elena. It seemed alive, not just biologically, but somehow aware. "We don't have time for this," muttered Marcus Kane, a grizzled ex-soldier who had taken charge of the bunker's security. He leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. "Every second we waste down here is another second those aliens get closer to wiping us out." Elena didn't look up from her work. "If we rush this, we risk losing control entirely," she replied sharply. "Erebos isn't like anything we've dealt with before. If we release it without understanding its limits, it could destroy everything, including us." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And if we do nothing, what then? You think those aliens are gonna stop because we asked nicely?" The argument hung heavy in the room, but no one dared interrupt. Everyone knew Marcus had a point. Outside, the Vorthek forces were relentless. Entire cities had already fallen under their shadowy war machines, and refugee camps were overflowing with terrified civilians. Food supplies were dwindling, medical resources were nearly exhausted, and morale was at an all-time low. For many, survival felt impossible. But Elena refused to give up. She believed, no, she knew, that Erebos held the key to humanity's salvation. Its ability to adapt meant it could potentially counter the Vorthek's advanced technology. The problem was figuring out how to harness that power without letting it spiral out of control. "Look," Elena said finally, turning to face Marcus. Her dark eyes burned with determination. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, but right now, this is our only shot. If we can figure out how to communicate with Erebos, if we can make it work with us instead of against us, we might stand a chance." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. A young soldier burst into the lab, his face flushed with panic. "They're here," he gasped. "Vorthek scouts, they found one of our supply depots. They're heading this way." The room froze. Everyone exchanged worried glances. The bunker wasn't designed to withstand a direct assault. If the Vorthek breached their location, it would mean the end, not just for them, but for any hope of fighting back. Elena clenched her jaw. There was no more time for debate. "Activate the containment protocols," she ordered, grabbing a data pad from the table. "Seal off the main corridors and prepare the emergency exits. And bring me the Erebos sample. It's time we saw what it can really do." As the team scrambled to follow her instructions, Elena stared at the glowing vial containing Erebos. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was reckless, dangerous. But sometimes, desperation drove people to take risks they wouldn't otherwise consider. Above ground, the Vorthek marched forward, their metallic boots crunching over debris. They moved with mechanical precision, scanning every corner for signs of life. Commander Calvos had made it clear, leave no survivors. Resistance was futile. Little did they know, deep below the surface, humanity was preparing to fight back in a way they couldn't possibly imagine. The Vorthek advanced through the ruins of Chicago like a dark tide. Their towering war machines crushed abandoned cars and shattered concrete underfoot, while smaller scout drones zipped through the air, scanning for signs of resistance. The streets were eerily silent, save for the hum of alien technology and the occasional creak of collapsing buildings. To Commander Calvov, watching from his command center aboard the Obsidian Spear, it seemed as though humanity had already given up. But appearances could be deceiving. From the shadows of crumbling skyscrapers, a group of human rebels watched the invaders with cold determination. Led by Marcus Kane, they had spent days preparing traps using whatever scraps of tech they could scavenge: broken wires, rusted metal, and fragments of old explosives. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. And tonight, they would make the Vorthek regret stepping foot on Earth. "Remember," Marcus whispered to his team, crouched behind a pile of rubble. "We hit hard and fast. Don't let them pin you down. Once the trap is sprung, we retreat." The rebels nodded grimly, their faces painted with mud to blend into the darkness. Each carried makeshift weapons, crude flamethrowers fashioned from propane tanks, EMP grenades rigged from stolen electronics, and even Molotov cocktails made from gasoline siphoned out of abandoned vehicles. They weren't soldiers in uniforms. They were ordinary people pushed to their limits. But desperation made them dangerous. As the lead Vorthek mech lumbered into position near what used to be Millennium Park, Marcus signaled for the attack. One of the rebels hurled a smoke bomb into the street, filling the area with thick gray clouds. The Vorthek paused, their glowing sensors scanning the haze. Then came the first strike, a barrage of Molotovs that ignited against the mech's armored legs. Flames licked at its joints, causing sparks to fly as internal systems shorted out. "What is this?" One of the Vorthek troopers snarled, raising his weapon and firing blindly into the smoke. His shots ricocheted off debris, missing their unseen targets. Before the aliens could regroup, another rebel activated an EMP grenade. A pulse of energy surged outward, disabling several scout drones mid-flight. They plummeted to the ground, their circuits fried. The rebels cheered silently, fist-bumping in triumph. For the first time since the invasion began, they felt a flicker of hope. But the Vorthek weren't so easily defeated. Backup units arrived within minutes, their heavier weapons cutting through the smoke. Plasma blasts tore apart chunks of rubble, forcing the rebels to scatter. Marcus cursed under his breath as he ducked behind a toppled statue, narrowly avoiding a blast that left a smoking crater where he'd stood moments earlier. "We can't hold them here," shouted Maya Torres, a young engineer who had helped design the EMP devices. Her face was streaked with soot, her hands trembling as she reloaded her makeshift launcher. "They're too strong." Marcus gritted his teeth. "Fall back to the second position. Go, go, go." The rebels retreated into the labyrinthine alleys, luring the Vorthek deeper into the city. Every step the aliens took brought them closer to another trap. Explosions erupted around them as hidden mines detonated, sending shrapnel flying. The Vorthek roared in frustration, their once orderly formation devolving into chaos. High above, Commander Kel Vos clenched his fists as reports of the ambush flooded his comm channel. He hadn't expected such coordinated resistance. These humans were supposed to be weak, disorganized. Yet here they were, fighting back with cunning and ferocity. "Send reinforcements," Kale ordered, his voice sharp with anger. "Burn the entire district if you have to. I want every last one of them dead." Back in the bunker, Elena Reyes monitored the battle remotely via hacked surveillance drones. Her heart raced as she watched the rebels' daring tactics unfold. They were buying time. But for how long? She glanced at the glowing vial of Erebos sitting on the lab table. "They're holding their own," she murmured to herself, a mix of pride and fear swelling in her chest. "But they won't last forever." Elena picked up the vial, her fingers brushing against the cool glass. It was time to test Erebos, not just in theory, but in the heat of battle. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. In the dimly lit bunker, Dr. Elena Reyes stood over a containment chamber that pulsed faintly with an eerie blue light. Inside, Erebos swirled like a living storm, a mass of nanoscopic particles shifting and rearranging themselves in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The organism had been dormant for millions of years, but now it stirred with newfound energy, responding to the data feeds Elena had connected to it. Bits of alien tech scavenged from downed Vorthek drones were being analyzed by Erebos in real time, and the results were astonishing. "It's learning," Elena whispered, her eyes wide as she watched the swirling mass mimic the shape of a Vorthek weapon before dissolving into something else entirely. "It's not just adapting, it's evolving." Her assistant, Priya Patel, hovered nervously nearby, clutching a clipboard. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Reyes? We don't even know what Erebos is capable of yet. What if it turns on us?" Elena didn't look away from the chamber. "That's why we're testing it here, in controlled conditions. If we can guide its evolution, we might be able to use it against the Vorthak. But if we wait too long—" She trailed off, glancing at the monitors showing live footage of burning cities and advancing alien forces. "We won't have another chance." The decision weighed heavily on her. Every instinct screamed caution, but time was running out. Outside, Marcus Kane and his team of rebels were holding their ground, but they couldn't last forever. The Vorthak were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Humanity needed a miracle, and Erebos might be their only hope. "Patch me through to Marcus," Elena said suddenly, turning to Priya. "Tell him to pull back his fighters. I want everyone clear of Sector 7. Priya hesitated. "What are you planning?" Elena gave her a grim smile. "Something risky, but if it works—" She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she activated the lab's intercom system and spoke directly to Marcus. "This is Elena. Listen carefully. I'm deploying Erebos in Sector 7. Get your people out of there immediately. Once it's released, I can't guarantee your safety." Marcus's voice crackled over the speaker, tense but resolute. "You're letting that thing loose. Are you insane?" "I don't have a choice," Elena replied. "Trust me, Marcus. Just get everyone clear." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." As the rebels evacuated Sector 7, Elena initiated the release protocol. The containment chamber hissed open, and Erebos spilled out like liquid smoke, spreading across the floor before vanishing into the ventilation system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered, and the hum of machinery grew louder. On the monitors, strange readings spiked erratically. Outside, the Vorthak forces entered Sector 7, unaware of what awaited them. Their scout drones scanned the area, finding no signs of resistance. Confident, they signaled for reinforcements to move in. That's when the first wave of Erebos struck. The organism seeped into the Vorthak systems, infiltrating their weapons, armor, and even their psychic communication networks. As the aliens raised their rifles to fire, the barrels melted and reformed into useless shapes. Their exosuits locked up, joints freezing mid-step. One by one, the invaders collapsed, overwhelmed by an enemy they couldn't see or comprehend. Back in the bunker, Elena watched the chaos unfold on the monitors. Her heart pounded as she saw Vorthak soldiers stumbling blindly, their weapons turning against them. A mech exploded as Erebos rewired its power core, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. "It's working," Priya breathed, awe mingling with fear in her voice. "But how far will it go?" Elena didn't answer. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Erebos was more powerful than she'd imagined, but also more unpredictable. It wasn't just countering the Vorthak. It was consuming them, absorbing their technology, and using it to grow stronger. Suddenly, alarms blared in the lab. The monitors showed Erebos spreading beyond Sector 7, moving toward nearby human settlements. Elena's stomach dropped. "No," she muttered, rushing to the controls. "Stay focused, Erebos. You're supposed to fight the Vorthak." "Not." Before she could finish, the screens went dark. The connection to Erebos was severed. "What happened?" Priya demanded, panic rising in her voice. Elena clenched her fists, dread settling in her chest. "I think we just lost control." Elena stared at the blank monitors, her mind racing as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Erebos was no longer under their control, or at least not entirely. The organism had spread far beyond Sector 7, consuming Vorthak technology with terrifying efficiency. But it wasn't stopping there. Reports began flooding in from nearby settlements, describing strange phenomena. Power grids failing, vehicles shutting down, and even communication devices going haywire. Worst of all, some survivors claimed they'd seen Erebos targeting humans who got too close to its influence. "It's evolving again," Alina muttered, pacing back and forth in the lab. Her voice trembled with a mix of awe and fear. "It's not just fighting the Vorthek anymore. It's growing smarter, more aggressive." Priya Patel stood frozen by the monitors, clutching her clipboard so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "We unleashed something we don't understand," she said, her tone laced with horror. "What if it decides humanity is a threat too?" Alina stopped pacing and turned to face her assistant. "That's why we have to act fast. If we can re-establish a connection with Erebos, if we can communicate with it directly, we might still be able to guide its behavior." But how? The containment protocols were useless now. Erebos existed outside their systems, spreading like wildfire across the ruins of Earth. It wasn't confined to a single location or device. It was everywhere, an invisible force rewriting everything it touched. Marcus Kane burst into the lab, his face flushed with anger and exhaustion. He'd barely escaped Sector 7 before things went sideways, and the sight of him covered in dirt and sweat only added to the tension in the room. "You told me this thing would help us," he snapped, pointing an accusing finger at Alina. "Instead, it's tearing apart everything in its path." "I didn't know it would escalate this quickly," Alina shot back, her voice sharp but tinged with guilt. "Look, I'm not saying it's perfect, but right now, it's keeping the Vorthek off balance. Without it, we'd already be dead." Marcus clenched his fists, clearly torn between yelling and accepting the grim truth. After a moment, he exhaled sharply. "Fine. What's your plan?" Alina hesitated, then walked over to the table where the original sample container for Erebos still sat. Inside, traces of the organism remained, a faint shimmering mist clinging to the glass walls. She picked up the vial, studying it intently. "We need to get closer to the source," she said finally. "If we can isolate part of Erebos and analyze its core structure, maybe we can figure out how to regain control." "And where exactly do we find the source?" Marcus asked skeptically. Alina pointed to a map on one of the monitors. The red zones indicated areas heavily affected by Erebos' presence, places where Vorthek forces had been decimated, but also where human activity had ceased entirely. At the center of these zones was an old industrial district littered with abandoned factories and underground tunnels. "There," she said firmly. "That's where Erebos first gained access to alien tech. If we go there, we might find enough residual material to study and possibly use against it." Marcus frowned, crossing his arms. "You're talking about walking straight into enemy territory. The Vorthek are still hunting us, and now you want us to march into a death trap." "It's our best shot," Alina replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her decision. "If we don't try, Erebos will keep spreading until there's nothing left. Not the Vorthek, not humanity, nothing." For a long moment, no one spoke. The gravity of the situation hung heavy in the air. Finally, Marcus let out a resigned sigh. "All right, but if this goes wrong, I'm blaming you." Alina nodded, though she felt anything but confident. As they prepared to leave the bunker, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Erebos was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a force of nature capable of both creation and destruction. And now, it was up to them to decide whether it became a savior or a scourge. As the team loaded into a battered transport vehicle, Alina glanced at the glowing vial in her hand. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Earth would never be the same again. The transport rumbled through the desolate streets of the industrial district, its headlights cutting through thick clouds of ash and smoke. The air smelled acrid, a mix of burning metal and something faintly chemical. Erebos' presence was everywhere. Abandoned factories loomed like skeletal giants against the dark sky, their windows shattered and walls crumbling. It was eerily silent, save for the occasional groan of collapsing structures or the distant hum of alien machinery. Dr. Elena Reyes sat in the passenger seat, clutching the vial containing traces of Erebos tightly in her hand. Her knuckles were white, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She glanced at Marcus Kane in the driver's seat, his jaw clenched as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Behind them, Priya Patil and two other rebels held makeshift weapons, their faces tense with anticipation. "We're getting close," Marcus said finally, nodding toward a massive factory complex ahead. Its towering smokestacks leaned precariously, and strange blue tendrils of light snaked around the rusted pipes outside. "That's where it started." Elena nodded, swallowing hard. "Be ready for anything. We don't know how Erebos will react when we get closer." As they approached, the vehicle's engine sputtered and died. The lights flickered once before going out completely. For a moment, everyone froze. "Great," Marcus muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "What now?" Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. Blue light pulsed from cracks in the pavement, spreading outward like veins. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but it felt curious. "It knows we're here," Elena whispered, stepping out of the vehicle cautiously. The others followed, weapons raised but unsure where to aim. There was no visible enemy, just the creeping sense that they were being watched. They moved toward the factory entrance, where the glowing tendrils seemed thickest. Inside, the space was cavernous and dark, illuminated only by patches of bioluminescent energy clinging to the walls and ceiling. Strange patterns shifted across the surfaces, resembling circuit boards come to life. In the center of the room stood what looked like a swirling mass of particles, the heart of Erebos itself. Elena stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. The mass pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. It didn't attack or retreat, it simply observed. She extended her arm, holding the vial up toward it. "I think this is how we reconnect," she said softly, though her voice echoed unnaturally in the vast chamber. "It recognizes its own." "No offense, Doc, but I'm not loving this plan," Marcus growled, keeping his weapon trained on the shifting mass. "What if it decides to eat you instead?" Elena ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. Slowly, she opened the vial, allowing the tiny remnants of Erebos inside to merge with the larger entity. At first, nothing happened. Then, the entire room lit up with blinding blue light. The mass surged forward, engulfing Elena in an instant. "Elena!" Priya screamed, rushing toward her, but Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Wait," he barked. "We don't know what's happening." For several agonizing seconds, Elena disappeared within the swirling vortex of light and particles. The others could only watch, frozen in shock and fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed, revealing Elena standing unharmed, but changed. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, and her skin shimmered with a subtle metallic sheen. She looked down at her hands, flexing them experimentally. When she spoke, her voice carried an otherworldly resonance. "I can feel it," she said, turning to face the group. "It's letting me see everything." "What do you mean?" Marcus demanded, lowering his weapon slightly. "Are you still you?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. But I'm connected to Erebos now. I can understand how it works, and maybe even control it." Priya stared at her, tears welling in her eyes. "You sacrificed yourself." "No," Elena replied firmly. "I became part of something bigger, something that might save us all." As she spoke, the blue tendrils began retreating, withdrawing into the core mass. Outside, the hum of alien engines grew louder. The Vorthak were closing in. Elena turned to the team, her expression resolute. "This isn't over yet," she said. "But now we have a fighting chance." And for the first time since the invasion began, hope flickered faintly in the hearts of those who remained. High above Earth, aboard the Obsidian Spear, Commander Calvos paced the bridge like a caged predator. His crimson eyes burned with frustration as he reviewed the latest reports from the surface. Entire platoons of Vorthak soldiers had vanished without explanation, their communications cut off mid-transmission. Weapon systems failed inexplicably, and even the mighty war machines that had crushed countless civilizations were rendered useless in certain areas. "What is happening down there?" Kale growled, slamming his fist against the command console. The metallic thud echoed through the chamber, drawing uneasy glances from his crew. Lieutenant Zern stepped forward cautiously, her elongated skull tilting slightly as she addressed him. "Commander, our forces are encountering anomalies," she said carefully, choosing her words to avoid provoking his temper further. "Some kind of interference is disrupting our technology. Our scans suggest it's originating from specific zones on the planet." Kale stopped pacing and turned to face her, his voice low and dangerous. "Anomalies? Explain." Zern hesitated before continuing. "It appears to be some form of adaptive organism. It infiltrates our systems, corrupting them at a molecular level. Whatever it is, it's unlike anything we've encountered before." Cal's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. Earth was meant to be an easy conquest, a quick extraction of resources followed by subjugation of its primitive inhabitants. Instead, this thing was turning the tide against them. For the first time in centuries, doubt crept into his thoughts. "We need to escalate," Kale declared, his tone hardening. "Prepare the nullifier cannon for deployment." The bridge fell silent. Even Zern looked startled. "Commander, the nullifier cannon is forbidden except in cases of total annihilation. Using it here will devastate not only the humans, but also the planet itself, and possibly our own forces if they're caught in the blast radius." "I'm aware of the risks," Kale snapped, his voice rising. "But unless we act decisively, we risk losing control entirely. If this organism spreads beyond Earth, it could threaten the entire empire." Zern bowed her head reluctantly, knowing better than to argue further. She relayed the order to the engineering teams, who scrambled to activate the massive weapon housed within the flagship's core. The nullifier cannon required immense energy to operate, draining reserves from other parts of the fleet. Ships began disconnecting non-essential systems, leaving them vulnerable to potential counterattacks. As preparations continued, Kale retreated to his private quarters, seeking solitude to think. He stared out the viewport at the blue and green orb below, its surface marred by scars of war. Something about Earth unsettled him. Perhaps it was the resilience of its people or the mysterious power now opposing them. He had always prided himself on being a tactician, a conqueror who relied on strength and strategy. Yet here he was, resorting to desperate measures. For the first time, Kale allowed himself to reflect on the morality of his mission. Was conquering Earth truly worth the cost? The Vorthak Empire thrived on fear and domination. But what did they gain from destroying worlds instead of understanding them? His musings were interrupted by an urgent message from the surface. One of the surviving scout units reported sightings of a human woman leading attacks against their forces. What made her unique was her glowing blue eyes and strange connection to the anomalies. According to the report, she seemed to command the very organism wreaking havoc on their operations. Alina Reyes, Kale muttered under his breath, recalling the name from earlier intelligence briefings. A scientist, once considered insignificant, now posed the greatest threat to his campaign. He clenched his fists, resolve hardening once more. Humanity would pay for resisting. But deep down, a part of him wondered if Earth's defiance was a sign, not of weakness, but of something far greater than he had anticipated. Back on the surface, Alina stood amidst the ruins, her newfound connection to Erebos guiding her every move. As the nullifier cannon powered up above, she knew the final battle was near. And this time, there would be no retreat for either side. The ground trembled beneath Alina Rey's feet as she stood in the heart of what used to be a bustling city square. Now, it was a wasteland littered with debris and remnants of Vorthak war machines that Erebos had dismantled. The air crackled with energy, both from the alien invaders' failing systems and the pulsating presence of Erebos itself. Alina's glowing blue eyes scanned the horizon, where flashes of light signaled the ongoing conflict between human rebels and the relentless Vorthak forces. She could feel Erebos coursing through her, a constant hum of awareness that connected her to every movement, every decision the organism made. It wasn't just adapting anymore. It was learning, strategizing, evolving faster than anyone could predict. But with its power came volatility. Alina knew she couldn't control it forever. If she lost focus, even for a moment, Erebos might spiral out of alignment, destroying everything in its path, including humanity. Alina, Marcus Kane shouted, running toward her with urgency. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, his voice hoarse from shouting orders to scattered rebel groups. We intercepted a transmission. The Vorthak are preparing something big, something called the nullifier cannon. Alina's blood ran cold. She'd read about such weapons during her research years ago, planet-destroying devices capable of erasing entire ecosystems. If the Vorthak activated it, Earth wouldn't stand a chance. Neither would Erebos, or her connection to it. "We don't have much time," she said, turning to face Marcus. Her voice carried an eerie calm despite the chaos around them. "I need to merge fully with Erebos. Only then can I stabilize its behavior long enough to stop the cannon." Marcus stared at her, horrified. "Merge? What does that even mean?" "It means becoming one with it," Alina replied softly, her gaze unwavering. "If I succeed, I'll be able to direct Erebos more precisely. But there's no guarantee I'll come back as myself." "No," Marcus snapped, stepping closer. "You've already risked too much. We'll find another way." "There is no other way." Alina shot back, her voice rising sharply. For a brief moment, the glow in her eyes flared brighter, illuminating the tension on her face. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I asked for any of this? But if we don't act now, none of us will survive. Not humans, not Erebos, nothing." Behind them, Priya Patel approached cautiously, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another solution," she pleaded. "You're talking about sacrificing your humanity." "And what exactly is left of my humanity?" Alina countered bitterly. "Look around you. Billions are dead because we weren't strong enough to fight back. If merging with Erebos gives us a fighting chance, then I'll do it. For everyone who didn't get one." No one spoke after that. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, mingling with the distant sounds of battle. Finally, Marcus let out a defeated sigh. "Fine, but we're staying with you until the end." Alina nodded, though she knew they couldn't follow her into what came next. She walked to the center of the square, where faint traces of Erebos swirled like mist over the cracked pavement. Closing her eyes, she reached out mentally, feeling the vast consciousness of the organism envelop her own. Images flooded her mind, ancient landscapes, shifting patterns, endless possibilities. It was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. "I'm ready," she whispered, opening her arms wide. The swirling mass surged forward, engulfing her completely. Blue light erupted outward, so intense it forced Marcus and the others to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Alina was gone, or rather, she had become part of something greater. Her voice echoed across the battlefield, amplified by Erebos' power. "This ends now." Above, Commander Cal Vos watched as the nullifier cannon powered up, its energy core glowing ominously. He felt a pang of unease but pushed it aside. Victory required sacrifice. But deep below, Alina, now fused with Erebos, prepared to strike back. The final battle for Earth's survival had begun. The nullifier cannon roared to life, its massive barrel extending from the underside of the obsidian spear like a jagged claw. Energy crackled along its surface, building toward a cataclysmic discharge that would reduce Earth's surface to ash. Commander Cal Vos stood on the bridge, his crimson eyes fixed on the glowing countdown timer. In minutes, the weapon would fire, and with it, Humanity's last hope would vanish. But Kale wasn't celebrating. Instead, he felt an unsettling chill creep up his spine. Something was wrong. Reports poured in from the surface. Entire squadrons of Vorthek forces were being neutralized at an alarming rate. Weapons failed mid-battle, mechs collapsed into piles of scrap metal, and psychic drones short-circuited before they could even deploy. It was as if Earth itself had awakened to fight back. "Commander," Lieutenant Zern said urgently, her voice trembling. "Our systems are destabilizing. Whatever this anomaly is, it's targeting us directly." Kale clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. "Redirect all available power to shields and countermeasures. We cannot afford to lose control now." Meanwhile, on the ground, Alina Reyes, or what remained of her, moved like a force of nature. Merged with Erebos, she floated above the battlefield, her body encased in shimmering blue energy. Her once human form was now a swirling mass of light and particles, radiating power that defied comprehension. Around her, tendrils of Erebos lashed out, dismantling Vorthek technology piece by piece. War machines crumbled, their components absorbed and repurposed by the organism. "This isn't just resistance anymore," Marcus Kane muttered, watching from a safe distance. He and his team had retreated to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, but even from afar, the sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying. "She's become something else entirely." Alina's voice echoed across the battlefield, calm yet commanding. "Vorthek invaders, your reign ends here. Leave this planet, or face annihilation." On the bridge of the Obsidian Spear, Kale froze. That voice, it wasn't human, but it carried traces of Alina Reyes' determination. How could one person, or whatever she had become, pose such a threat? "Fire the cannon," Kale barked, overriding safety protocols. Now, the countdown accelerated, bypassing final checks. But before the weapon could unleash its destructive payload, a surge of blue energy erupted from the atmosphere below. Erebos reached upward, its tendrils piercing through layers of defense and infiltrating the flagship's systems. Alarms blared as lights flickered and consoles sparked. The nullifier cannon sputtered, its core destabilizing under the strain. "No," Kale shouted, slamming his fist against the console. "This can't be happening." Alina's voice reverberated through the ship's communication system. "Your arrogance has doomed you, Commander. Surrender or be consumed." For the first time in centuries, Kale hesitated. His empire prided itself on dominance, but facing extinction forced him to reconsider. Was conquest truly worth the cost? Could survival mean more than victory? "I won't surrender," he growled finally, though doubt lingered in his tone. Turning to Zern, he issued a desperate order. "Initiate emergency retreat protocols. Recall all surviving units and prepare for hyperspace jump." As the Obsidian Spear began pulling away from orbit, Erebos unleashed one final surge of energy. The nullifier cannon exploded harmlessly within the ship's containment field, crippling the vessel but sparing Earth. Below, the remaining Vorthek forces scrambled to evacuate, abandoning their fallen comrades and equipment. When the dust settled, silence fell over the battlefield. Alina drifted downward, her glow dimming slightly as she landed near Marcus and the others. Her features were still recognizable, but her eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity. "It's over," she said softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "They're retreating." Marcus stared at her, torn between relief and sorrow. "At what cost, Alina? What have you become?" She didn't answer immediately, gazing instead at the horizon where the sun began to rise. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted, "but I'll do whatever it takes to protect what's left." Above, the Vorthek fleet disappeared into the void, leaving behind a scared but defiant Earth. Humanity had survived, but at a price no one could fully comprehend. The sun rose over a battered Earth, its golden light spilling across fields of ash and ruins. Smoke still curled into the sky from smoldering cities, but amidst the devastation, there were signs of life. Survivors emerged cautiously from underground bunkers and makeshift shelters, their faces weary yet hopeful. The Vorthak were gone, or at least retreating, and for the first time in months, humanity dared to breathe freely. Dr. Elena Reis stood atop a hill overlooking the remnants of what was once a thriving metropolis. Her body shimmered faintly with blue energy, a constant reminder of her fusion with Erebos. She no longer felt entirely human, nor did she feel like the ancient organism that now flowed through her veins. Instead, she existed somewhere in between, a guardian figure tasked with maintaining balance between creation and destruction. Marcus Kane approached her, his boots crunching against the gravel-strewn ground. His expression was unreadable as he stopped beside her, hands shoved deep into his pockets. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply watched the sunrise together, each lost in their own thoughts. "You saved us," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was rough, tinged with both gratitude and unease. "But I don't know if we'll ever understand what you've become." Elena turned to face him, her glowing eyes softening slightly. "I didn't do it alone. Humanity fought back when all hope seemed lost. That resilience, it's what gave me strength. But at what cost?" Marcus pressed, gesturing toward her altered form. "You sacrifice yourself, Elena. You're not just you anymore." She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "No, I'm not. But maybe that's okay. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary to protect the things we love." She paused, glancing down at her hands, which pulsed faintly with energy. "Erebos is powerful, too powerful to leave unchecked. If I hadn't merged with it, it might have destroyed everything, including us. Now I can guide it, make sure it doesn't spiral out of control." Marcus sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And what about you? What happens next?" "For you? I stay vigilant," Elena replied firmly. "As long as Erebos exists, someone needs to ensure it doesn't harm innocent lives. That responsibility falls to me now." Her words carried a weight that silenced any further argument. Marcus knew she was right, even if it pained him to accept it. Elena had become something greater than herself, a protector, a symbol of humanity's resilience. But she was also a reminder of the cost of survival. Behind them, survivors began clearing rubble and tending to the wounded. Children laughed softly as they played among the ruins, finding joy even in the midst of despair. Life endured, fragile but unyielding. High above, Commander Calvo sat in his damaged flagship, staring out at the stars. The retreat had been humiliating, a stain on the Vorthak Empire's otherwise flawless record of conquest. Yet as he reflected on Earth's defiance, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of respect. Perhaps dominance wasn't the only measure of strength. As the days passed, Earth began to heal. Crops sprouted in patches of fertile soil, and engineers worked tirelessly to restore basic infrastructure. Slowly, communities came together, united by shared trauma and newfound determination. Elena remained a constant presence, watching over humanity while keeping Erebos in check. She visited settlements occasionally, offering guidance and reassurance. Though many feared her transformation, others saw her as a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of sacrifice and adaptation. One evening, as the stars twinkled overhead, Elena stood alone on a cliffside. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of Erebos within her, a quiet hum of infinite potential. Somewhere deep inside, she still held onto fragments of her humanity, clinging to memories of who she used to be. "We survived," she whispered to the wind. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." And with that, she turned away, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for Earth, for humanity, and for herself.